Hello, everyone. Okay, so today is the 3rd of April, 2024. This is going to be the second part of the videos that I had done about two women leaders of yesteryear. And I did one on Catherine the Great, and I said that I would do another one, and this is today's, on Isabella of Spain. The two women were reigned in their different countries. Isabella in the 15th century, and the Empress Catherine the Great of Russia in the 18th. Two very different women, but I think that I want to show you how these women, especially Isabella, who was only really 15 when she started having to deal with problems in the country, in Castile, dealt with how to govern a country. Okay, so let us start. She was going to become queen at the age of 23. Just a summary. The first thing that she had to deal with was to fight for the crown, because although she was the rightful heir to the throne, there were problems. I will tell you what those problems were. So there was a war, succession there. Then she had to deal with who she would marry. The queen, her brother, wanted her to marry someone else, and she didn't want to, so she had to put her foot down and marry the man that she wanted, Ferdinand, Prince of Aragon, King of Sicily, several other titles. That was difficult. Then she got it. She married him. She was actually the one who proposed to him. Okay, we'll get into all those details. Then she had to put law and order, bring law and order to the country. The country, Castile, was very poor, didn't have an army. Because of the bad ruling of the present king, her brother, the country was a total disaster, and the first thing that she had to do was to bring order to the country. All right. Then she had at the same time to deal with the reconquest. Before that, she brought together all these different independent kingdoms of Castile and Aragon and Leon and all this, and bring it together into a whole that would be Spain. She achieved that. Then she had to finish the reconquest. The Arabs invaded Spain in the year 711, between 711 and 715. And although the northern part and the middle part of Spain had been reconquered, Andalusia in the south remained Arabic. This war was going on forever, and on and off, depending on the king of the time, and whether he was successful. All right, so she wanted to reconquer the whole of the country, which she did. In the year, and then the thorny issues for which she is known, in the year 1492, three things happened. She reconquered the whole country. Granada was the last one. She had managed to finance Columbus. She was the only monarch who believed in him, that was possible, or there was a possibility. That was discovered, the New World was discovered in the same year of 1492. And in the same year, the act for which she, outside of Spain, she's known for, was the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. All those things came together in the year 1492. Now the thorny issues of the Inquisition, and which had started before, however, in any case, the Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews are very thorny and difficult issues, and I think that I will have to do a second video on this, because I want to do it properly, and I want to go back to history and how it got to that point and so on. So that requires a little bit of time and explanation. So what I'm going to do today, it's simply to take you to 1492, and perhaps it's an introduction to her as a monarch, as a woman. What was she like? How did she govern, and why? In what manner she did that, and so on. So I want to, this first part, I just want to introduce the woman to you, and her character and her personality. First of all, this is going to be like, you know when you talk about kings and queens in the Middle Ages and so on, that this is like a soap opera. So I have to introduce the cast. The cast is this. Her father, John II, had married twice. From the first marriage, he had a son, Henry IV, who is going to be the protagonist practically in this first part. And from the second marriage, he had two children. One, first of all, Isabella, the firstborn, and the other a male, Alfonso. All right. So, Henry IV, therefore, was her stepbrother. He reigned from 1454 to 1474, just to give you an idea of the times. Before I talk about Isabella, I have to tell you a little bit about him, and you wonder, well, why? Well, because the country, the kingdom, was in such disarray that I have to explain to you why things developed the way they did. Okay, so historians say that he was probably the worst king that Spain ever had. And that says a lot, because we had quite a few of them. Right, but he was, of course, her stepbrother. He was a very singular man, as the men that he surrounded himself with. He was, I'll give you the term used by historians of the time, he was a eunuchoid dysplastic. What does that mean? He was impotent. So, he is not going to have an heir to the throne. This is going to complicate matters a lot. Okay. He was impotent, but not... this is partly true. He was impotent in part, if that doesn't sound too strange. He was impotent with women. All right. Now, he was not with men. Okay. So his first man lover, or at any rate, the man who introduced him, the historians of the period said, to the other side. We are going to have to read between the lines, because they wouldn't come out with it, okay, although it was known by everybody. But these are the words that they use, okay. Okay, so his first lover, or the man who introduced him to his sexuality, as it were, was his own tutor. His name was Juan Pacheco. You don't need to remember the name, but it was his tutor. Then there were many. Then there was a Gomez of Cáceres, okay. A young man, he's described of great beauty and affability, with whom he maintained a very intense relationship. This one seems to have reaffirmed Henry IV's sexuality. And give him some confidence. Henry had always been a very timid, very shy, introverted adolescent. However, at the age of 16, because he was king, he was obliged to marry his cousin, Princess Blanca of Navarre. Navarre in northern Spain was still an independent kingdom. And with the aim, obviously, of procreating an heir to the throne. Well, there was no wedding night, so to speak. In fact, there was no one night or one day. He did not touch his wife for the 13 years that they were married. That is what we read in the ecclesiastical documents, in the ecclesiastical process for the annulment of their marriage, which he himself, the king, solicited. And there it reads that the king, Henry IV, and Princess Blanca of the queen now, Blanca of Navarre, lived together for 3 years, quote, without at any time having taken place any sexual conjunction. Well, you all right. But in the document, he says that he had tried. He says that he had tried in true love and with true will to do his duty as husband, and to the point that he had, quote, ordered to be brought to him some aphrodisiac drinks, especially from Italy, to, quote, animate his virility towards his duty to the queen. It kind of didn't work too well, but the thing is that everyone knew, and there were popular songs and satires, and it was in the general gossip of the population that the king had a problem, in quotes. Many popular songs, made-up songs, poems ridiculing his frustrated physical union and emphasizing his preference for his favorites, and they called him accomplices. Anyway, some of them have names, and we have them: Alonso Herrera, Beltrán, and Beltrán is going to be very important if you can remember this name. Okay, but he had many other lovers. Some actually were not interested, but he was the king, and some had to go abroad just to miss him. There was one in the documents we read of someone called Miguel de Lucas, who wanted to go abroad because, quote, the king, he was trying to prevent the king doing with him things that a man does only with a woman. All right, end of quote. Another name, Francisco Valdez. He was caught, he was arrested trying to escape, fleeing from the monarch, who was actually very much infatuated with him. And he was captured, imprisoned, and then he would be visited in a secret jail by the monarch, Don Enrique, and it says, quote, the historian says, the chronicler says, the monarch, Don Enrique, putting aside affairs of state, would come and visit him to reproach him for his harshness of heart and his ungrateful elusiveness. Anyway, Henry spent his life partying. He did not attend. He was a bad king. He was not tending to the matters of state or anything. There is ample evidence that this, what I have just said, is correct, is true. Not only was he not leading a scandalous life in the eyes of the general population, not caring about government or governing, but the country was in the trying to recapture, to reconquest, the reconquista from the Arabs, and he didn't pay any attention to that. As a matter of fact, he did the opposite. He would fancy himself as an Arab, and he would dress as an Arab, and he would copy many of their customs. He even had an Arab guard, to the scandal of the populace. One historian writes, Marañón writes, "It is known conclusively that in this epoch of also Arab decadence, homosexuality had reached such an acceptance that it was seen as something habitual and compatible with heterosexuality between the two different sexes. He would dress as the Arabs did, imitate their manners, their food, and, the historian says, other customs leading to shameful ruin." In this, he was very different from his father, King John, who had been a sort of voluptuous man, given also to carnal pleasures, but with the opposite sex in his case. Henry's character from very early on rebelled against his father, but nevertheless he remained sort of very shy and timid, remained weak, say historians, submissive and distrustful. He did away with all the nobles, the Castilian nobles at court, and sought advisors within his friends. Now, these friends actually urge him and pressure him to have his marriage to Blanca of Navarre annulled, but pressured him nevertheless to seek a new bride, the sister of the Portuguese king Joan, who was then 16 years of age and apparently a very fine and beautiful woman. And he did. But Juana again did not manage to stimulate the monarch's hypophysis, which is a master gland of the endocrine system, responsible for several functions. Anyway, the historian Palencia writes that on his wedding night to Juana, to Joan, the king did not, quote, "the king did not exhibit any happiness, nor did gladness shone in his countenance." But, nevertheless, Juana managed somehow to get pregnant. And she had a daughter. And everyone and their brother knew that that daughter was not the king's daughter. She was called the Beltran girl, Beltraneja. Everyone knew, I don't know how, but perhaps there was some kind of evidence, behavior and so on, that Beltran was his lover, but also the lover of the queen, whom what we don't know is whether he was also attracted to her or whether he was just simply doing the king a favor. Whatever it was, everyone agreed that this daughter was his, and she was forever called the Beltran girl. All right, so Henry was not upset with Beltran, which seems to me to indicate that perhaps they had come to an agreement. As a matter of fact, he granted him many favors, and proceeded to want this Beltran girl to be the heir to the throne, as his daughter, as if he were his daughter. So, because the evidence was so clear, in 1464 the General Royal Council met with Henry present, and he was told that there was no possible way that he could pass the throne on to this girl. The king, who was before the nobility, was always very weak, did not say anything at all, remained quiet. But he continued to give Beltran, the father, his lover, all the honors that he wanted. Now, things got to such a point that the nobility said we cannot continue. It wasn't only because of that, but because the country was not being governed. Henry was just partying all the time. And so they decided, in an extreme thing to do, I suppose, they decided to name the young boy Alfonso, who was his stepbrother, the king, to actually depose him from the throne and claim the crown for Alfonso, who was at the time 11 years old. Alfonso accepted, probably his tutors and the other nobles, just sort of arranged everything. And Alfonso became the king. This was going to be now a kind of a civil war, because Henry was the rightful king and he was alive, he was not dead. So this was like a coup d'etat. What Henry did was to invite Isabella and Alfonso to the palace. First of all, when his father died, he extinguished them. So he sent them away to live in poverty, in penury, basically, to an old castle in ruins, in some chambers of an old castle. And there they suffered sometimes even hunger. It was cold, it was in ruins. Her mother, Isabella's mother, was there, and the historians say that he was half insane. By reading about it, you get the feeling that perhaps she was suffering from a grave depression, because she would be sometimes better, sometimes worse, and so on. When this happened, Isabella was 8 years old. Her mother could not look after herself. They had no servants, really. So from the age of 8, Isabella is going to look after her mother by herself. And this is going to, obviously, to form her character. She took responsibility for her mother. So when the nobles declared Alfonso king, Henry invited them both, Alfonso and Isabel, away from their mother to the palace. He did not want their mother to come to the palace. Their mother had to be there by herself. Isabella worried to death about her mother, but she had to obey the king, and she went. And she had to observe his life, which was, different. And she was appalled. she was from a very early age, probably because of her mother's influence and her tutors, a very pious girl, a very religious girl, a very serious girl always. And she was absolutely appalled at that, what was happening there. And she had to witness a lot of it. That also formed her character. Anyway, the nobles declared Alfonso the rightful king because Henry was just a disaster. And lo and behold, Alfonso dies at the age of 15. He was journeying somewhere to Portugal, I think. And he died. Most historians think that he was actually poisoned. So now you have Henry, who had been deposed by the nobles, but he was really still king, you know. And you have Isabella, okay? And then you have the other girl, the Beltran girl, who is going to claim the throne. And this is one of the first problems that Isabella will have to deal with when she comes to the throne. Okay, so Alfonso dies, and the problem was, well, it's not a problem. Henry's father, the father of the three of them, King John, knowing when he was about to die, or even before that, that Henry might not be able to have procreate an heir to the throne. I think it was already obvious by that time. In his last will and testament said that Henry was the rightful heir, of course, to him. But the next one was obviously Alfonso, and Alfonso, he wrote all about Alfonso, so he knew very well what was going to happen. Okay, so with many stipulations as to what should and should not be done, and many directions to Henry to ensure that Alfonso would be his heir to the throne. Henry did not fulfill any of his father's stipulation. He felt very much threatened for some reason. He felt very threatened by this child who would have to occupy the throne after him. So anyway, he didn't last long. He was poisoned. So the throne goes back to Henry. Really, it should. But the nobles did not want him. They wanted him to keep, to continue being deposed. And they actually went to Isabella. And they said to her, he can no longer be king. The country, he's making matters in the country worse and worse, and we cannot afford a king like this. So we beg you to actually take now Alfonso's Alfonso's crown, and accept the crown. We will be with you. The whole of Castile will be with you. Don't worry, we will support you. And here is one of the first instances when you see Isabella's character. She was only 15 or 16 at the time, and she refused the crown. She said, thanks, but no thanks. What she said was, when she was offered the crown, she was that was being done prematurely. She says, and I quote her, "I am very grateful for the goodwill and affection that you show me, and the offer to be at my service, and the affection that you're showing me, which is due of my due of my reward, he says. But though the intention be good in those who would offer the crown to another while the king is still alive, what end can you possibly achieve by doing this? What can we possibly achieve but more war and disorder by doing that? This is not going to solve anything, she said. There will be a civil war. So she said, it is not yet my turn. Give the kingdom back to my brother, the rightful king, Henry IV, and perhaps this will bring peace to the kingdom. This is the greatest service that you can do for me now. That was her reply. So I think if you see a 15-year-old being offered the crown and reacting with that prudence, at any rate, if not wisdom, we can see her personality already. Wait for your time, wait for the right time. She said that she wanted to be queen of all Castile, not just of one faction or one part of Castile. So there is a mixture here already of idealism or hope and realism at the same time. And she actually proceeded to send letters to all the nobles of Spain to actually be behind her stepbrother, King Henry IV, and promise them that upon his death, but only upon his death, she would accept the crown. Henry IV was actually quite thankful for that, and then officially recognized her as his heir. Now, she had been promised in marriage, in those days, how, arranged marriages and so on. She had been promised in marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon when she was 6 years old. He was a year younger. But for some reason, Henry did not want this to happen. He wanted to marry her off to the King of Portugal. And the King of probably for political reasons, but also because the King of Portugal was also insisting. Now, the problem with the King of Portugal is that he was already an old man. He was a widower with grown-up children. But he was infatuated with this beautiful, she was actually quite beautiful girl, Isabella. And he was insisting on it. She absolutely refused. Henry wanted to comply, but she absolutely refused, and that was not easy at the time, as you can imagine. She said, and I quote, "I'd much rather not be a stepmother to children who are older than I am." She had a look around and was actually quite happy with Ferdinand, even though they had been promised to each other when they were little kids. But looking at him and so on, it seems as if she fell in love with him and she wanted to marry him. There were other possibilities at the time. For example, the English Prince Edward IV's brother, who was actually looking, perhaps not so much for a wife, but for military and political support for the House of York against Lancaster, the War of the Roses. She refused. She also refused the Duke of Berry, the French, the heir presumptive to the throne of France, who was described in any case as, quote, "skinny, effeminate, his legs so thin as to be deformed, watery eyes, almost blind." Okay, she said no, she really wanted Ferdinand. All right. Now, when Henry, her brother, accepted and officially named her as his heir to the throne, she made him promise that he would not make her marry against her will. And she, in turn, promised him that she would not marry anyone without his authorization and consent. But because of his insistence now with her marrying the old man from Portugal, he felt that he failed to fulfill his promise by insisting on this old king of Portugal. And so he said that now she felt free not to actually having to ask for his consent, which he would not give anyway, and decided to go ahead with the marriage. And she arranged everything herself, sent emissaries to Ferdinand. She actually proposed to him. Ferdinand of Aragon accepted gladly. When Henry discovered this, he threatened to imprison her, and she was actually going to send the army and everything, and she had to escape to where her mother was in the province of Avila. She was alone, so the church actually came to her aid, and the Archbishop of Toledo put together some nobles and some armies and surrounded her with these troops, claiming her as their queen. So anyway, nothing happened there. She married Ferdinand. She felt, as I said, that the king had broken his promise, and so she felt that she no longer needed his authorization. She would marry Ferdinand without his consent. All right. So when Ferdinand hears that she's in danger, that she is going to be imprisoned and so on, he actually comes to her aid. He says that he wanted to console her plight with his presence, whatever the risks he would endure, it wouldn't matter. He would come to her aid. Wanted to get on a horse and start mount a horse and start going there, but then he realized that was a little bit you cannot fight an army with just you on a horse. So he needed a plan. He needed a plan to go and protect her bride. And so together with his nobles and also with the Archbishop of Toledo, who was very much defending them and their union, he would actually marry them. They had this plan. Okay, 2 caravans from Aragon in the north to Castile in the center of Spain. Okay, 2 caravans going towards Castile. In the caravans, there were people. All you would see, if you saw them, you would see people of different social classes, not to appear too obvious that this was the Prince of Aragon and nobles. He actually had Henry's ambassador with them, and also servants appearing to be taking gifts to the king. If anyone stopped them, that is what they would say. The other caravan following close behind, also with the army but disguised. People pretended to be merchants, muleteers going to Castile to sell their wares. They were all Ferdinand's people. And in front of them all, there was a young man on foot, a servant to all appearances, a muleteer, and that was Ferdinand himself. No one would have recognized him as the Prince of Aragon. They got there, the Archbishop married them. Isabel writes to the king saying that they're married. But nevertheless, she says that can there possibly be a reconciliation between the two of them? She had to do this. This is whom she wanted to marry. But would he please receive her as his sister, and so on. Anyway, long story short, Henry dies. The chronicles say of his life, a life, it was written, hold on a second, a life, it was written more unfortunate than culpable, but also a life unhappy, victim of disloyalty and ingratitude of those who call themselves his friends. One chronicler, Del Castillo, wrote, if at first he was seen with glory, they stole it from him. Though a master of great treasures, they stole them from him. Though he won many lands and many provinces stood by him, they, ingrates, made him lose them. They, having received the people around him, they, having received much favor, were made worse. He, suffering their injuries, was perhaps made better for them. Now Ferdinand. His death was announced to Ferdinand, who, they're married, the news come to them. At the same time, and before their crown, Ferdinand receives a letter from his father in Aragon, an urgent letter asking for help. Please come right away because Aragon is being invaded by France, He just got married. Isabel puts him at ease and says, look, he's worried about Aragon not having an appropriate army to fight France. He's worrying about this thing, obviously. But Isabel tells him, quote, do as you think you must, taking all needs into consideration. I cannot advise you, since I do not know sufficiently well what the situation in Aragon is. Just follow your conscience, really. So he goes to Aragon to help his father. In the meantime, Isabel needs to be crowned, and she is. And Ferdinand starts having doubts now. What is going on here? Why didn't she wait for him to be crowned together? Couldn't she have waited? And so his advisors are beginning to sort of put doubts and, bad vibes, saying, be careful about your wife, may want to start a war. Starting a war is easy, ending it is not. Do not absolutely believe what is being said to you by the grandees of Castile. Flee from them as if they were venomous snakes, and so on. He's beginning to wonder what is going on. At the same time that this is happening, the poor guy went to Aragon, just married. His wife is proclaimed queen. At the same time, Portugal is invading Castile. The king of Portugal, who was not accepted by Isabella, ended up marrying the Beltran girl, claiming that the Beltran girl was really the heir to the throne of Castile. And so what he wanted now is for them to be proclaimed the king and queen of Castile. And this is the very first problem that Isabel has in her hands. Also, bad news. For some reason, the Archbishop of Toledo, Mendoza, who had helped them so much and who even married them, now he's terribly angry with them and actually is threatening to help the Portugal cause. Why was that? Well, human weakness, human pride. He has issues. He didn't feel that Ferdinand was grateful enough to him. The petitions, several petitions that he had made, perhaps Ferdinand, in all the things that were happening, didn't reply. The fact is that the Archbishop of Toledo, a person of weight, was very angry with him. So angry that he threatened that he would take Portugal's side. He had issues. I'm going to tell you this story about what happened here and how Isabella sorted it out, because it's not an important example. The Archbishop will come round and eventually, be very proud of her and so on. But it is a way of how she dealt with problems. This is what happened. Actually, to show really how prudent she was. This is a characteristic of her personality, I think. Never to rush into things, but deal with it in what I claim is a very feminine way of solving problems. So, just an example. The Archbishop was very, very angry, right? Okay. He comes to see Ferdinand. He has a whole list of grievances, all right? Ferdinand listens and decides to take a conciliatory approach. He doesn't get upset. He says that because he tells them, because of our friendship, how much you have helped us and done for us, perhaps if I have, upset you, obviously in some way, you will forgive me and, just tell me what your needs are. The Archbishop actually doubts for a moment because he did not expect this conciliatory approach from Ferdinand. Isabel was prudent, but Ferdinand was a young man, and he expected him to fight back, but he adopted this conciliatory tone, and he was taken a little bit aback. But he recovers and says, I didn't come here to seek reconciliation. I came here to tell you of our rupture. Just to announce it to you. Okay, but then asks for what he knows is practically impossible. One of the things that he knows is impossible and Ferdinand cannot give him. What is this? Well, there are 7 posts. They just got married and they're trying to sort out who is in government, who isn't, and so on. And there are 7 posts at court, 4 of which had already been assigned to persons of trust. The Archbishop wants those 7 posts to go to his people. Ferdinand cannot grant him the 7 posts, but he gives them the remaining 3. The remaining 3, yes, and 4 more of perhaps less status, but nevertheless kind of equivalent. They would be part of the government. It didn't work. The Archbishop left. He said that wasn't good enough, and he left in a puff. Now, when Isabella heard of it, she told Ferdinand not to worry, and this is what she said to him. I know him well. Even though he's threatening with going to Portugal's side, I know he's no vulgar traitor. He's just very angry at the moment. His spirit is high and generous, but also he has this indomitable and cantankerous personality. She says he is dragged by overwhelming passion, never by small and mean motives. Leave it to me, I'll sort it out. I know him well. She tries to go and speak to him, but he had already left. Probably because he was afraid that he would change his mind. He just left in a puff. And he said, I found the queen spinning. When I saw her for the first time, I found her spinning at the spinning wheel, and to the spinning wheel she will return. This is how angry he was. Isabel was willing to forgive him, thinking of how much he had helped them both to get married and to put her on the throne and so on. She sent the Duke of Alba to catch up with him and ask him to return to court. The answer was no. The Duke actually said, I can't even repeat the words that he used. She decided not to send any more emissaries. She would go and ask him herself. And she said she would go, not Ferdinand. Why? For two reasons. First of all, because as a woman, a man is given to respect women perhaps more than another man. So she felt that she had that feminine advantage. And also because she knows in her heart of hearts that his anger is not with her but with Ferdinand. She mounted a horse and went after him. When she got to his town, she sent him a message. I am here. She was there. Would he receive her? Would he come and supper with her? The Archbishop said, if you enter Alcalá, that's outside Madrid, if you enter Alcalá through one door, I will leave through the other door. Anyway, he continued being angry. She was patient. Eventually he would come round and actually be very proud of her. What else? In 1475, Portugal invades Castile with over 14,000 men and 5,000 horses. All of Castile, the King of Portugal says, will belong to Portugal. Ferdinand, with no army, has to put an army together and get money. There was no money anywhere. Isabel, dressed in manly clothes, on horseback, would travel throughout the whole of Castile, on horseback, provinces, towns, asking people to join the army, recruiting for the army that Ferdinand was putting together. She travelled everywhere. She would stop everywhere at ordinary inns. She would speak in the plazas in town, everywhere, speaking about the patria, the homeland, how important it was to defeat this invading Portuguese army. She travelled like that through the whole of Castile. One night, after a whole day on horseback, she stopped at an inn and had a miscarriage. She would have 2. She would have 5 children altogether. 2 miscarriages. She had a miscarriage at an ordinary inn. The only person who was there to help the Queen of Castile was the innkeeper's wife. And the next day she mounts her horse again, travelling everywhere. Ferdinand is very hard at work too. He's getting the army together, Soon they have more than 400,000 men, but needed money. Portugal knows that Castile had no army, no money, poor as a church mouse. And the chronicler says, but courage triumphs. Monies and rents are a welcome addition when courage does not fail. Anyway, somehow the Cortes, the parliament, and the church put enough monies together. And she continued. She was a great speaker, a quite good, orator, if you like. At one point they meet, because they're doing different things. Isabel is going around sort of talking to people. The PR, can we say? Anyway, and Ferdinand is busy doing the real work, putting the army together and training the army. They both meet at one point, and Ferdinand is very happy. He's doing well with the army, and he's telling her, how great things are going. I give you this as another example of her personality, because she can be very strict and at the same time very womanly, as it were. This is another example. She listened to him and how great everything was, and then went on to remind him in no uncertain terms of what still needed to be done. Now, Ferdinand saw this as a little bit of a cold shower, and he was rather upset about it, about this reminder, and he actually remarked, quote, "Women, however ready and willing we are, however much effort we put into our endeavors, however successful, never seem to be satisfied." He was actually quite hurt that she would not recognize the hard work that he was doing. And then Isabel, having been so strict and perhaps even a little bit harsh, turned and use her feminine arts and her perhaps a little bit coquettish, and replied, "I'm not telling you, I'm just suggesting, because I'm right." I'm just suggesting because I'm right? If what you're saying is that women, because we do not confront danger directly, as you do, should not speak, I have to remind you that we are at risk too, But she said that with a smile, and he said, "Well, all right." Never mind. Okay. She diffused the situation. People would remark that she wore pants, not skirts. She traveled by horse everywhere to the cities that had pledged themselves to Portugal, asking them to come back to Castile. Fernando wanted to challenge the King of Portugal personally. And the King of Portugal said, well, perhaps that's not necessary. Perhaps all we need is to exchange. I don't know how he thought of that, but I mean, how that would be possible to exchange the two ladies, okay? So as hostages, you would give me Isabella and I would give you the Beltran girl, who happened to be his wife. Ferdinand was absolutely repulsed. They were very much in love, okay? They were. So he was absolutely insane about this. He said, "Never," he said. "The difference between the two is so great that it's obvious to all eyes. How can we possibly even put them together?" Okay, that was a little bit of an offensive. Anyway, the mayor of Leon, in the western part of Spain, was about to cede to the King of Portugal. It's next door. It's on the border. She mounted her horse and goes there herself directly and destitutes him of his from his post. At a certain point, Portugal is losing the fight, and the king is no longer demanding to be king of Castile, but says he will be content with Galicia, which is in the northwest above Portugal, and a few other cities here and there. Ferdinand replies, "We're not even a beehive you're going to keep from Castile," was the answer. Anyway, finally Portugal surrendered. Ferdinand wanted to the prisoners, the Portuguese prisoners, Ferdinand wanted to kill them. And here the Cardinal of Spain, Mendoza, now tells him, who actually had been in battle himself as an ordinary soldier, he said, "No, don't do that." He said, this is what is written in the documents, when you kill men in battle, and that is war, that is a different thing, but when you kill men once they have surrendered, that is cruelty. All of Castile's noblemen will be offended, especially when they see these men pleading for their life and pleading and liberty for their persons. To kill the unarmed who cannot defend themselves is an act estranged from all virtue, because we perhaps were not able to kill them in battle when they were fighting. So we're actually cowards, he's telling them, if you do that. Those people who now want to return to Portugal are ordinary people of whom it was demanded of them to go to war by their king. And if they committed atrocities in our kingdom, perhaps we would have committed atrocities also in theirs. It is difficult to mollify the sword in moments of rage, but now, 10 days after they surrendered, 10 days after the battle is over, let us be content with defeat, not revenge. To defeat is of strong men. To take revenge is of wimpy, timorous women. Okay, so Ferdinand accepted that the Portuguese prisoners could return. The Portuguese king, an anecdote here, had left his jewels and a dress behind, and they were offered to Fernando. No, he said, he refused them. We would wish, if we could, to take from the King of Portugal his free will, not his personal toilette. Not for me. Okay, so what we have here is that first of all, she has to make sure that she remains the queen against the Beltran girl. Then she has to fight to be able to marry whom she wants. Then she has to make sure that Ferdinand understands that he is not the king and she the queen, kind of 1 or 2 notches below. No, you king, me queen, same. Fernando, Isabel, Fernando, and he has to use a lot of finesse there for him not to get upset about certain things and not to take it personally. Yeah. That required some tact. Then she had to win this war. Okay, now that this is over, she will embark upon something else, and that is to, what she said, keep the family together. In other words, put law and order in the country. Castile was a mess, so was Aragon. Highway robbers everywhere. She institutes what we might call today the first police for the highways. She wants to end chaos and anarchy in the highways. And here you see very much the hands of a woman. The historian says she molded the nation as if with clay, as a mother does, giving it body and soul. In a brief time among the people, there was peace, concord, and justice. Others remarked, she governs as if she were a man, more by strictness than mercy. And yet she's a woman with a great heart. But this woman was to unite Spain, and the next step was to bring all those individual kingdoms together under the same crown. That wasn't easy either. She was in her 20s. She modeled Spain in her image, they said, for she was very much a woman, and a very feminine woman at that. She did not, this is what I want to point out. She did not see the nation as an entity that, as a man does, for example, as an entity that you could just govern and dominate and subjugate, if you wish, in varied forms. She saw it as a big family that you need to organize, you need to keep together, and everyone is going in some different directions, but you have to keep the family together. That is how she saw the nation. Keep order and gather everyone and bring them all together and get order. This thing goes there, that thing, order. Not everything all over the place, socks here, pants over there. Order in the house. But this wasn't easy to bring so many kingdoms together. But what they found is that people would voluntarily give themselves to her. And a chronicle says men do not necessarily possess this knowledge, not naturally anyway. It is particular of her sex, a marvelous feminine intuition of how to govern, although she was not lacking in man's heroism as she travelled throughout the whole of Spain on horseback. She wanted one body, all the members of that body that had been scattered before her all over the place, to come together and become a big family, one united kingdom. At the same time, because she's so very much in love with her husband, and I do have to point this out, she actually wove his shirts herself, mended and sewed his own shirts herself. Why did she do that? She took the time to do that. She obviously had many other people who could weave his shirts. She took great delight of doing it herself. And Ferdinand was very proud of this. At one meeting, he said, he pointed to a good suede jerkin or a vest or a waistcoat. He said, my wife altered the sleeves 3 times and look at it as good as new. To govern well is not to lead sheep by means of fear or even law, but to guide a collective along a path that might be harsh and arduous, but has ultimately the promise of a horizon, says the historian, which, though not the same for everyone, is nonetheless the dream that each dreams of. She was a woman who was as comfortable with the sword as she was with the needle, and both were important. So after she brought all these kingdoms together, now she has to finish the Reconquista, the reconquest in the south of Spain. And that is going to bring us then to the two difficult, thorny issues, and unfortunately the only ones that she's known for in the English-speaking world, and that is the Inquisition, which she had little to do with anyway, but certainly with the expulsion of the Jews. And because, as I said at the beginning, this is important, and I want to pay close attention and give a lot of detail to it, I think this will be the first part of the video, and tomorrow I will post the second part, dealing mainly with, and with the Columbus and the discovery of the New World. So I will deal with the New World, the Inquisition, and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. So I hope you got a sort of an idea of the kind of woman she was. Thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye. I'll see you tomorrow.